Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I come to you today because just like in previous years, right as we hit the end of November, beginning of December, I start to really find myself thinking, what palette am I going to pan for the upcoming year? You guys have been so supportive. In previous years, you guys have told me, don't feel pressured to pan a palette because I have wanted to really scrutinize most of my eyeshadow collection. But with the choice to carry on with my Lorac Mega Pro 1 palette for a second year, I really was able to heavily scrutinize a majority of my eyeshadow collection. The only area that I didn't really go through and also didn't heavily prioritize was my drugstore palettes. But the reality is, I love panning a palette. I am someone who is quite goal-oriented. I enjoy seeing the progress month to month, and I also really enjoy educating myself and other people on what it really takes to use up an entire eyeshadow palette. I know when I first started buying eyeshadow palettes, I never was thinking under the premise of what would it take for me to truly use up every scrap of this product compared to, when I get a foundation, I know for certain I'm going to finish that foundation up, or I know for certain I'm going to finish a lip gloss up. So I really enjoy these challenges. However, like I normally am in other years, I'm a little bit torn on which palette to pick. So I'm going to show you the ones that I currently have in the running. I'm going to talk to you about pros and cons of each one, and then I would love to hear your feedback because a lot of times you guys give me good feedback that does help steer me in a clear direction. So let's go ahead and get started. So immediately my first thought was to pull in my Lorac Pro Palette 1. This is what it currently looks like. I have taken out 2 shades. I have already panned 3 shades, and then I have panned currently on these 2 shades. Pros for this: think that I could most certainly pan this in 1 year. We already know black is off the table for panning because I don't really wear black eyeshadow. If I happen to pull in a pencil liner, I will use it for that, but really aside from that, not gonna happen. So this means I'm left with 10 shadows. Based on panning a Lorac Mega Pro palette, that is a realistic number of Lorac shadows for me to pan, especially because I already have good progress in 2 out of the 10 shadows that are left. The other pro that I think could work with this palette is that I have a number, as I've mentioned, drugstore eyeshadows that I haven't tested out and scrutinized to see if I want to keep or declutter. I have a feeling a majority of the drugstore shadows I would end up decluttering after I tested them, but I feel like this palette really lends itself to that kind of testing because I obviously need to bring in a lot of other shades to get complete looks. I definitely plan on using with this light pink as a all over base color, but aside from light bronze and maybe occasionally gold, I don't really have a lot of lid looks in here, so I would need to bring in other palettes. The flip side, though, to talk about some cons, is that this is mostly a crease palette. I do think it would move pretty slowly throughout the entire year because I'd only be using really singular shadows for a good chunk of the time until each shadow was sort of used up, and perhaps that might be a little bit boring to watch. Other thing I'm thinking about is that this sort of was, to me, one of the first palettes that when I started to see people pan palettes, I felt like a lot of people had picked this one, and I think this was sort of like the kickoff of the pan that palette challenge, at least to me, my experience with this. I saw 5 or 6 people pan this, and that inspired me to pan palettes, and now I feel like a lot of people do it. So I don't know if it would be exciting or fun to watch. And I do think that that is something to consider because while I don't just do things for views, I've heard from a lot of people in my past 2 pan that palette challenges that people were inspired to pick up their palette and use it, and they felt more confident in trying to use that palette after seeing me use it for months on end. And I just don't know if panning this would have that same impact. All right, second palette that I am considering panning is my Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. This palette, I just really loved when I pulled out to scrutinize. I think it has really gorgeous shades in here. I also think that there's a lot of diversity and it's a standalone palette. I could easily work with, cream shades. I have lid shades. I have crease shades in here. I do think that I might get rid of a couple of these shades if I were to pan this palette because I don't think all of them align with my makeup preferences, but I think this would be a fun palette to work on. I also have never panned a Too Faced palette before, and I feel like this could be really fun to give a whirl to. However, some cons of this palette is that, first off, it is very warm toned, and I will admit, as I have been left with mostly warm tones on my Lorac Mega Pro 1 palette, I think for like a solid 3 or 4 months, I'm kind of getting tired of the warm toned eyeshadow looks. I would prefer to have something that's a bit more cool toned, and this really doesn't offer that diversity. It to me really pulls very warm. I also know that Too Faced palettes can be hard to pan because they are really pressed in here and there's a lot of product. And so I don't know if I want to go with something that really is very brand new in the sense that it's got some usage but not a lot of dedicated usage, and I don't know if I could realistically get through this palette in 1 year. The next palette that I have is a palette that I have considered panning in the past. It was in the running before I ended up picking my Lorac Mega Pro. It is the Cargo Summer in the City Eye Palette. Looks like this. I think this palette is stunning. I have always really liked it from the moment that I purchased it, and even though it doesn't look like it, I used it a lot when I first got it. Pro of panning this is it is, I think it's the oldest palette that I am looking at using for this year. I also feel like I could realistically pan this up because these shadows are pretty soft and they are relatively powdery, and so I do think it doesn't take a lot of effort to make dips and to get pan on these shades. However, talking about some cons, I don't have any cream shades in here, and so I definitely feel like I need to bring that in. I also don't have any mattes, and I have to say, thanks to my Lorac palette that I've been working on for 2 years, I have really become a lover of mattes in my crease. I definitely don't think I need to always have a matte in my crease, but I do like that variety. This is all entirely shimmers, albeit it's a lot of lid shimmers and a lot of brown shimmers that I could easily bring into my crease. So not a lot of cons with this palette. I definitely feel like it's closer to the front of the running compared to other palettes, but I just think this is a gorgeous palette and I do love it. The next palette that I have also comes from Lorac. It is my Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales palette. This really caught me off guard. I think this is a really gorgeous palette, and it would be a pro for me to pan this because it is so bulky, and part of the reason why I think it has sat neglected in my makeup collection is because I never really pull big bulky palettes out to play with, but when I played with this, I loved it. And a majority of the shades in here I really could see myself using. I also love the mix of satins and mattes, and I feel like it does have more of that cool toned vibe that I've really been craving. So I really have been drawn to this palette. However, I'm not sure I want to pull in a big palette again. Granted, there are fewer shadows in here than my Lorac Mega Pro palette, but part of me really would prefer to have a standalone year where I could actually get through a palette in 1 year, and I'm not sure that I could do this. And I'm also not somebody who could just put this aside, like spend a whole year on it, make really good progress, and then just be like, all right, cool, been there, done that. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this away, or I'm gonna go ahead and like pull a new palette out to pan. That's just, I'm very much a completist. I'm a finisher. I don't want to like have a lot of halfway worked through palettes and never really finish them. So I do feel like if I picked this and I didn't finish it in a year, I would probably carry on with it for a second year. And I just don't know if I want to agree to those terms and conditions. Again, I have no idea. Maybe I could get through this in a year because it is less product, but I don't know. I'm not convinced. So really that's my only deterrent to using this palette. Now, for all I know, if you guys are like, girl, it was awesome seeing you do that for 2 years, sign me up, do another 2-year palette, maybe I'll be swayed, but that really is one deterrent to this big kahuna. The last palette that I have might be surprising. It is from Makeup Revolution, and it is the Emily Edit the Wants palette. This palette, first off, I think it would be really interesting to pan a collaboration palette. I foolishly thought for a moment in time that I could pan the Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette, but that thing has so much product. It is ridiculous. Like, I could probably never pan that. It would be like a 3-year palette challenge, and I'm just not down for that. Granted, this palette has 24 shadows that are 0.03 ounces, so I don't know offhand how that compares to the Lorac Mega Pro palette, but like, she big. But I think it would just be really fun to see how that could play out with a collaboration, because I feel like collaborations come out every like 5 minutes, and how realistic is it for you to buy all of them and be able to use them up, slash like, when it comes down to it, would you really want to with these collaboration palettes? Like, I'd be curious to see my thoughts on, do I feel like it was as thoughtfully put together as of just a regular brand palette? In Emily's case, I feel like it was, but I don't think that rings true for every collaborator. But I also love these shades. However, I don't necessarily know the quality of all of them. I haven't played with this a ton. So thinking about cons, that could prove to be a real con, because I could be agreeing to pan a palette that maybe in the end I don't really love. Also, everything I said about the Dead Men Tell No Tales palette rings true here. This is a huge palette. I don't know if I want to sign up for an entire year plus working on one palette, when I could potentially, with some of the smaller palettes that I have picked, like the Cargo one or the Lorac Pro palette, could realistically get through either one of those in 1 year. All right, guys, so there it is. Those are the palettes that I am sort of weighing in my mind for panning for the 2020 year. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts. I know at the end of the day, you guys are going to support whatever palette I pick and are going to tune in for it, but I'm really at a point where I'm just sort of indecisive about it, so getting your feedback could be really helpful in tipping the scales for a certain palette. But that is it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed chatting with me today, and I will talk to you in the next video real soon.